Welcome, gentle reader, to this episode of Everything is Everything, this most remarkable YouTube show by Amit Varma and me. I'm a guy called Ajay. Today, in the depth of the winter of August, Amit has upped his attire so as to be warmer. Tell us about it, Amit.
So, number one, I'm a huge fan of hoodies. Let's break that sentence down because today we're talking about the art of reading. What does it mean to say I'm a huge fan of hoodies? It means two things. One, I'm huge, and two, I'm a fan of hoodies, right? And I'm also a huge fan of hoodies. So, you see, a careful reading will reward you with additional meaning and layers, right? And why am I a fan of hoodies? When did I become a fan of hoodies? I became a fan of hoodies when I was a professional poker player between 2010 and 2015. Now, poker is fundamentally all about math. Common Janta thinks it's about tells, hiding tells, looking at the other person's pulse on the neck and realizing they're bluffing, etc., etc. Actually, those play a small part. It's completely math. We've got a great episode on poker where we spoke exactly about that and the role that game theory plays. But it is possible that in live games you could be giving away a lot of tells. So the trick there is poker players will often hide as much of themselves as possible. So typically, if I have made a bet, the typical way for me to sit would be something like this, covering my face, just no eye contact, look at the table, don't smile, don't react to anything that's said. And I would have to keep it standard whether I'm bluffing or not. So all that they see is they see as little of me as possible, and I'm just looking at the table and everything has to be exactly the same. You can of course give off false tells, but only bad players fall for that. But typically, because for example, the pupils dilate sometimes when you're in great anxiety. So people look for pupils dilating. The one tell is that the carotid artery or whatever over here that starts pulsing. One reliable tell I have used a lot is you try to make the person smile, normally with a joke. And human beings have two kinds of smiles. There's a fake smile and a genuine smile. The fake smile is for the camera. Ki, okay, say cheese. That's for the camera, right? I don't do that, but it's for the camera. And a genuine smile is different. It's a kind of smile that comes to my face when I see you, Ajay Shah, and the smile that is appearing on your face right now. That's a genuine smile. And you can generally make out the difference. And if the guy has a genuine smile on his face, I'll realize that he's comfortable. And that may or may not say something. You update your priors a little bit. But if he's got a fake smile, it means he's worried. What is he worried about? Of course, he could be, it doesn't mean he's bluffing. Maybe he's got a great hand and he's got to go to the loo and he's thinking, if this motherfucker doesn't call or fold quickly, meri to tatti yahi nikal aayegi. So he could be nervous because of that. But generally, you can update a bit. So anyway, so that is my love for the hoodie. This hoodie is from an online company called Bewakoof. I have an awesome brown hoodie at home from H&M. Big fan of H&M, as we have spoken in the past. Turn Black, alas, does not have any kurta hoodies, but it is what it is. And with that, I have rambled enough. Please.
There's a line I cannot place. Is it Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett? She had a smile that never reached her eyes.
That's a beautiful line. I don't know which one of them it is, but hard-boiled fiction boys. And those guys were masters of saying things tersely. Short sentences pack in a lot, right? That doesn't mean, though, that you should read them fast, because short sentences make for a fast rhythm. But sometimes when you're reading fiction, as I will talk about later, you need to slow down.
Also, the writing style of there'll be a short sentence, there'll be a short sentence, there'll be a short sentence, and then there'll be one lovely elaborate sentence. It just, that sentence comes to life because of its context. Amit, we're all busy. Okay, my calendar is full. Don't you know how many hours a day I spend scrolling Instagram? Okay, I have no time to read. So why bother? Is it even worth doing? The world is going to hell.
In another few minutes, Ajay Shah, you will delete the Instagram app from your phone and you will become a dedicated reader. I promise you this. So I have 11 reasons. And yes, I'm not scared of taking a number because Ajay can't count, but Amit can. So I have 11 reasons for why you should read. This book is divided into 3 sections. Section 1, why you should read. Section 2, how should you build a habit of reading? Because building habits is so hard, especially when it comes to reading. And Section 3, how you should read a book. You know, non-fiction, fiction, how do you approach it? Do you take notes? Do you skim? What pace do you go at? All of those. We'll cover all of those. But first, I want to give you 11 reasons for why you should read a book. And reason number 1, something that I've spoken about often, I've written columns about it, is that it helps you connect dots. I had once written a column called the Aankho Dekhi Prime Minister, and it was based on an anecdote told to me by a friend of Narendra Modi. She knew him pretty well in the aughties when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, and she told me the story that one day about 6 or 7 of them were at his house and they were sitting there, and Mr. Modi started telling a story about once upon a time when he was a child, his mother was very ill and she was feeling hot, so he went to put on the fan, and when he flicked the switch, he realized that there is no electricity. And apparently, as Mr. Modi related this story, he started to cry. Right. And my friend's point was this, and she later fell out with him or stopped being in touch with him. But my friend's point was this, that that Modi is an Aankho Dekhi Prime Minister in the sense his understanding of the world is experiential. Right. He realized the importance of electricity. So one of the first things he did in Gujarat was he made a lot of noise about electrifying every village and so on and so forth. He would have experienced a lot of other things which are wrong with the country firsthand, like the state of our roads and so on and so forth. And he would have had legibility into them. He would have understood those problems. He would have tried to work them out. But he doesn't go beyond this. He is only experiential. And the problem is a lot of the deep truths of the world, which you and I talk about all the time, go beyond what you can experience with your own eyes. With your own eyes, you can only experience what is happening in the present moment. And you can, and not in the past. You can't have a dialogue with the past. And you can only experience a limited set of things. While some of the great truths about the world are deeply complex, like spontaneous order, the way societies form themselves, the way languages evolve. You can't experience it. You know, the fact that the world is positive sum. Now, every double thank you moment is actually an experience, but we don't think about it. We don't have those frameworks. So instinctive thinking is still zero sum. You know, the way the economy works is so deeply complex. You and I talk about it all the time. We did a beautiful episode on finance last week. You've spent some 30 years in that field. Yet, it is such a complex field. Even for you, there are some things which, you know, surprise you or take. So, the world is deeply complex. And the only way to get past this problem is to read a lot. Now, in the case of Mr. Modi, I don't blame him for not being a reader because he didn't have a privileged childhood, I'm guessing, and with his humble background, he would not have been able to read. What I would expect from him, though, given that limitation, is that he would then hire experts in different fields around him and listen to their advice. I'm not sure there is much evidence of that happening, but leave that aside. You know, reading is something essential because reading is the only way we can really gather knowledge about the world, things we can't experience ourselves. And what I say is, we paint pictures of the world by connecting dots. The more dots we have, the more high definition our picture. And therefore, we owe it to ourselves to gather as many dots as we can. And the one way of doing that is through reading. It is the best possible way of doing that. And this is not just about getting information about the world, but also making sense of it. Harold Bloom once said, information is readily available. Where is wisdom to be found? And again, this is something we will only get from books.
When we've done life lessons, you and I have talked about this theme in a somewhat different way, and I just want to connect that up here. It's good to think that a practical person experiences one life. Okay, so standing at age 70, a practical person has accumulated knowledge and experience of one person. When we tap into the world of books, into the world of ideas, we gain the knowledge of hundreds of lives, of thousands of lives. And that is incomparably superior to the accumulated knowledge and practical wisdom of a practical person who's been a great doer and execution person, practitioner for one full life. That's reason number one. Now take us to reason number two.
Reason number two is that reading is good for the brain. In 2008, Nicholas Carr wrote a famous essay called Is Google Making Us Stupid? Right? And what his essay argued, and he later elaborated this into a full-length book called The Shallows, which came out in 2010, excellent book. And his postulation, I think this was a cover story on The Atlantic, and what he postulated was that in Google, and by Google he broadly was using Google as a proxy for the internet, but it could be any social media today. In fact, if anything, things have gotten worse. And his postulation was that our interaction with the internet is so incredibly shallow that we are not going deep into anything, and this is actually making us stupider, and books take us in the other direction. This was the point that he made. This is something that I talk about and think about all the time, that I talk about the quality of leisure time. that in my leisure time I can just do scroll, swipe on Instagram or Twitter, or I can read a book. And both of them to an outsider might seem like a waste of time ki time pass kar raha hai. But in the first one, I'm in a shallow state of mind. I'm going from factoid to factoid to factoid. There is no deep thought. Information isn't connected to more information to build a complex ecosystem of facts which can then, suddenly become an insight in my brain. That process simply isn't happening. That process happens when you read books. The neuroscientist Marianne Wolf has spoken about this in various places, that reading actually changes the physical structure of the brain. It helps you make those synaptic connections, and I'm sure if you took an sort of an electrical map of the brain when someone is reading, you would see not only a mind at peace, but also a mind with intense activity between neurons. You're making connections, you're figuring stuff out. And reading gives you that. Like, I remember this great experiment on the taxi drivers of London. I think the taxi drivers of London, when they started using Uber and they started relying on their maps, their brains literally got rewired. In the sense, earlier, because they had to remember everything, their brains were wired in a particular way, but their brains got rewired because they no longer had to do that. They no longer had to remember yahan se daina, wahan se baina, etc., etc. And it's okay for me to use Hindi because many of them would know Hindi. But so similarly, everything that we do affects the wiring of our brain, and it can create a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. So the argument there is not just the fact that we are taking in more information or that we are taking in more knowledge, but the structure of our engagement with what we have in our hands, whether it's a book or a phone, changes the brain, changes the way we think, changes the depth that we have, and that is super important. For example, you and I often refer to this study by Jim Heckman, where he shows that between the ages of 0 to 5, children who grow up listening to 10-letter words around them, and he's using that as a proxy for complex discourse, have a higher layer of intelligence that others simply don't have, and you can't make up for it later, because 0 to 5 is when the most brain cells are being formed, right? So it matters. What are you reading? How complex is it? Are you looking at 140 character judgments on Twitter, so and so is evil, so and so is bad? Or are you reading complex arguments, figuring out stuff, dealing with cognitive dissonances? Are you doing all of that work? That's critically important. So it helps you to think more deeply and is good for the brain in that way. Also, what happens is that it gives you a larger vocabulary, right? Now, per se, when writers come to me for writing advice and say, how can I improve my vocabulary? My advice always is there's no artificial way to do it. You have to build a reading habit. But apart from that, I also tell them that you do not need a greater vocabulary than your readers. The words you know are most certainly enough to communicate whatever you want to. So that's a caveat that's out of the way. So don't have an inferiority complex if in whichever language you're thinking of, your vocabulary doesn't seem too great. But having a greater vocabulary can help you grok the world better. Wittgenstein would often make the point that our understanding of the world is limited by language. How much of what we see can we express, and how much can we analyze that and go deeper, one level deeper, two level deeper. And having more words is in a sense like having more dots to connect, to gain understanding. So, your internalization of grammar, of narrative structures, all of that also happens. And all of this is incredibly good for the brain.
Third reason to read, Amit?
The third reason to read is something you actually anticipated when you responded to my first point, which is that it is good for the heart. Reading builds empathy. What happens when you're reading? Like George Eliot called reading the nearest thing to life. As you said, we are living only one life. But when we read a book, we are living another life. We are living the lives of others. We are seeing the world through someone else's head. We are feeling the pain that they feel when something that happens to them that would never have happened to us, or that would not affect us similarly. And our emotionscape is expanding, as it were. It's a great way of getting empathy. In fact, a term that Martha Nussbaum uses is narrative imagination. It expands our narrative imagination. How do we grok the world? We build narratives about it. How do we understand other people? We do it through narratives, through stories about themselves. Oh, Ajay was terse with me today morning. One way of interpreting it is he's an asshole and I can just react with ego. Another way of interpreting it is that, Ajay was preoccupied because he was busy with the show design and he was working really hard on that, and I should really not have interrupted him when he was typing something, right? That's another way of thinking about it. So your narrative imagination, your understanding of other people, of the world. And what then happens is that, if you look at the world in a simplistic way, you're always passing judgment on other people, you're reacting with your reptile brain, your ego is always coming into play. But if you develop a narrative imagination, if you can put yourselves in their shoes, in their heads, in their eyes, then you see the world a little bit differently. And your connections become deeper and richer, and your relationships become deeper and richer. And all of this is the stuff of life. But the one life that you live alone will not give this to you. So reading books is good for the heart.
Amit, is that primarily about fiction as opposed to all books? So it would seem to me that great fiction is the prime engine of that sort of thing.
I agree with you. I wouldn't say that nonfiction doesn't do it. Reading
As much, yeah.
as much. Reading a great biography of someone, if it's well done, can really also give you the sense of somebody's life. But I agree with you that, and this is why I say it's essential to read both. Don't just read nonfiction. Don't have a utilitarian view of reading. That, oh, Amit said I need to gain knowledge about the world. Nonfiction is enough. I want facts. Why should I read fiction? Don't think like that. Because, fiction is deeply rich. It takes you to places that nonfiction possibly can't.
Okay, Amit, take us to the next element of why read books.
So we've done good for the brain. We've done good for the heart. And of course, we're using the heart as metaphor. And now I'll say good for the psyche, right? In the sense that reading is often like therapy for people. It can provide comfort and solace. When you have no purpose in your life or you feel no purpose in your life and times are dark, reading can help you out of that. In his great book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl wrote that, for people in concentration camps, literature, whether they actually had a book or they were remembering or discussing literature, was something that gave them some solace, something that there is something beyond this, there is another life, there is a scope for feeling a different way, and that the world changes, that the present moment is not all that there is. So I think there's a lot of comfort to be had there. Many of us will go through these dark times and you'll be wondering that, shit, my relationship isn't working out and somebody died and how do I deal with this grief? And there are many things that we have to deal with. But literature kind of tells us two things. It tells us that we are not alone, and it tells us that this too shall pass. And those are supremely important. And, in our darkest hour, therefore, literature can be useful to us. It is also good for the psyche in the sense that it can help us understand ourselves better. The essayist Montaigne, he said, I have no more made my book than my book has made me. And he was referring, of course, to the writing he did, but even the reading that he did. Like, I think of how much I know about myself. And actually, self-knowledge is a very rare thing. Self-reflection is very difficult, which is why so few people do it. But when you read, you are alone with yourself in a sense. And you're seeing yourself through the mirror of the world that you have entered. And it's a great guide to understanding yourself. To, you read a poem and something just hits you. And maybe you cry, maybe you laugh, maybe you read it again and you say, what the fuck, And those moments, if you haven't had them, if you don't read poetry and fiction, you won't even know what I'm talking about. But you just have to trust me and try that. That a great way of discovering the self is through reading books by others about others. It doesn't matter, but because every time we sit down to write a novel, in fact, and this is something Harold Bloom also pointed out once, that every time we sit down to write a novel, we are actually sitting down with ourselves. We are taking all of ourselves into that experience.
I have read that when Tolstoy was writing War and Peace, he used to walk around his house sobbing uncontrollably because he was lost in the mind of his characters.
And another reason to sob would have been that in those days they didn't have air conditioning, though he was in ice cold Russia. So did they have heating? I don't know. But yeah, this is...
They didn't have cat videos.
They didn't have cat videos. Obviously, he'll sob, bhai. बहुत दिन हो गए बिल्ली रोते हुए नहीं देखा.
Yes, Amit, carry us forward.
Okay, the next reason you will totally vibe with. My next reason, fifth reason for why you should read is because reading is good for democracy, right? Alexis de Tocqueville once famously said that it was for a democracy to work, it wasn't enough that there be voting. It was important that the citizens be well informed about the state of the world. That is essential. That is, in fact, one strong utilitarian argument for free speech. That without free speech, you cannot have a democracy, and we've discussed this in our earlier free speech episode. Similarly, if we say that, look, a bare bones expression of a democracy, a skeletal expression is that there are people and they are voting and they are choosing their leader. But if those voters are not informed about the world, if they don't care enough about it, then what point is that? And that information will really come through habits of reading that are built up. Habits of reading are incredible. You know, America and England and parts of Europe work well as democracies because more people read there than in some third world countries where not enough people read. Now, I am not claiming that education alone gives you some kind of wisdom or reading alone solves a problem. You know, we've had some highly educated monsters who have led authoritarian countries and brought ruin upon their people. And equally, we've had people with very little reading who have ended up being really powerful, strong leaders, right? So I'm not saying that that is a hard and fast correlation. But what I am saying is that the democracy you live in is likely to be a better democracy if it consists of good citizens. And part of the definition of a good citizen is a citizen who is well informed. And how do you get well informed? But by reading. It is one of the many ways in which you learn about the world. So reading is important for that reason. It's not just important for the individual, and those reasons are enough for me, but it is also important for society.
By reading, we impose a positive externality upon the world. We make 10 people around us think better, debate better, deal with themselves better. So it's just something that spills into the society, that reading makes better people and better people make better people. Speaking of the great monsters of the world, I will have you know that it was believed that Joseph Stalin, arguably the number 2 worst monster in the world. I believe the ranking is Chairman Mao and then Stalin and then Hitler. Okay, like the 3 worst monsters in world history. And Joseph Stalin proudly comes up as rank 2. He was considered an extremely sophisticated and erudite person. He was very well read. I'm trying to remember, I think Stephen Kotkin says that Stalin was a person who, modulo language problems, would be able to sit down and have a comfortable 1-hour conversation with any philosopher and thinker of the world. He would hold his own in a complex conversation of ideas. He had a vast library of books and he read well, he read intensively, he scribbled inside the books so we can see his reactions and his depth about how he was reading books. So that's a demo of, you know, not a sufficient condition.
Not a sufficient condition. Chairman Mao is also a demo of that. Like, he was a fine theoretician on some matters and he's considered one of the foundational thinkers on guerrilla warfare, which of course he learned by doing.
But more than that, he also was a theorist. He wrote books about the theory of how a guerrilla force could take on the KMT and win. Meaning, he didn't first do it by seat of the pants. He actually theorized his way into understanding the world. So Mao is very much a theorist.
Kind of like you, Ajay Shah, that you theorize about the world and then you do a YouTube show.
Those who can do, the others become podcasters. Okay, Amit, carry us forward.
My reason number 6 is that reading makes you more creative. You might think, hey, I'm such a creative person. And I've actually met people who say that they want to be writers, but they don't read. And I don't rock that. And I am blunt with them and I tell them straight away that that's not possible, right? Because your LLM, as it were, is too small. It is not as if you are born with a boundless store of knowledge and creativity and tools at our disposal that we can just use. You know, you have to, in a sense, build your LLM. And you do that really by reading more and more. And the more that you read, the more by osmosis you will absorb narrative tools that writers are using, what they are doing with the language, how people, you know, use sentences and paragraphs to build rhythm, to bring about a particular effect, and all by osmosis. It can also be done through conscious mindful reading, but mindless reading is perfectly fine for me, right? By osmosis, you pick up all of these tricks. You listen to 1 million songs, you will be a better songwriter when your turn comes, and if you listen to 100 songs. This doesn't mean that you copied somehow from the 1 million songs, but you are understanding how, musical forms work, you are understanding how different collections of notes and chords work, and your subconscious is using it for its creativity. So reading is super important for that reason. If you consider yourself a doer, then you also have to be a reader, because to do effectively, especially in a creative field, it is important to build that element.
So Amit, carry us to the seventh reason.
So my seventh point is one that is really mind-blowingly profound and we take it for granted. Reading connects us to a longer conversation around time. Yeah, every species can communicate with itself. Dogs will bark to each other, cats will meow to each other, especially while confessing, you'll have meow kalpas. But, but humans are the only species who can carry this across time. That I know what my great grandfather thought, even though I never met him. He died before I was born. Though actually, technically, I don't know because he didn't write anything either. But all of human knowledge is carried through. We are literally always standing on the shoulder of giants, right? So if we just engage with what is immediately around us, we don't have access to everything that has been passed down in our species. So if you want to be a philosopher, you can sit by yourself and say, I will philosophize, and, let your thoughts work their magic. But if you have read the history of philosophy, if you've read Plato and Aristotle, and you've come from there to the Enlightenment thinkers, and you've read Kant, and you've come all the way to the current day, and you've read Rawls and Nozick, and so on and so forth, if you've read Alistair MacIntyre, then all of that informs the way that you think about the world. It informs your thinking, and in a sense you are in conversation with them. Do you remember when we did that episode on Seeing Like a State, what you told me about James C. Scott? And I really love your description of it, that when you were reading Seeing Like a State, it felt like the author was arguing with you, that he was berating you, and you kept arguing back. You were in a conversation with a man who was a continent away, and he was alive then, but he isn't now. But anyone can have the same conversation with him. I can open a book and have a conversation with Plato. I can open a book and have a conversation with Adi Shankaracharya. It is possible. Books allow us to do that. So when you read a book, you are not having a conversation with people in the immediate vicinity about something of immediate purport, but you're having a conversation with great thinkers of the past who have built on each other's works, and you can build on them. You have giants to stand on the shoulders of only because you have books.
And number 8?
Number 8 is that reading gives us mental models to think about the world. Charlie Munger had a great phrase, lattice work of models, right? Everything is everything. If you just look at the world with one or two mental models, it isn't likely to, get you much insight. You might hit upon a mental model or an ideological framework which seems to explain everything. But it can't explain everything because reality is too complicated. And what reading does is it gives you, in Munger's words, a lattice work of models. You get many, 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 many models, and you can apply them as you deem fit. Kahin pe you can do the economic way of thinking and think about incentives. Kahin pe you can bring in anthropology. Kahin pe you can look at genetic data and say, oh, this is what happened. Kahin pe you can bring in natural selection and talk about how we are wired. Kahin pe you can look at the cinema of that time and contextualize according to that what influences a particular person in a particular time must have grown up under, and therefore why they behaved the way they did. Having a variety of useful mental models is amazing, and in a sense that is what we aspire to. It is always a lifelong learning journey that you learn more and more models, but the show is called Everything is Everything because of that the more you read, the more you realize the interconnectedness of everything, not just in terms of the interconnectedness of all the things in the world or the people in the world, but even all the fields of study in the world, which we have placed into little silos like sociology, economics, anthropology, but they're all deeply connected anyway because they're all studies of the human condition and the world that we live in. And reading allows you to gather all those different mental models and start making those connections.
Amit, carry us to the next.
My next reason is one that I vibe with. Reading can save us from loneliness. Schopenhauer once said that reading is like thinking with someone else's head instead of one's own. And often when we get into a funk and we get into a bad mood, we're only looking at the world through one prism. And when you read, you can look at the world through other prisms. Reading is actually what can save solitude from loneliness. You can be alone, and it's an essential learning in the world that we need to be alone with ourselves and not be lonely, that we need to be comfortable. And reading gives you companionship without intrusiveness. There's a great quote by Harold Bloom where he says, reading well is one of the great pleasures that solitude can afford you because it is the most healing of pleasures. It returns you to otherness. Imaginative literature is otherness and as such alleviates loneliness. Do you sometimes feel lonely, Ajay Shah? Never. Why? You never felt lonely.
Yes, Amit, carry us forward.
So my reason number 10 will make you happy. Reading gives us joy, right? And this is an underrated reason that reading is a heck of a lot of fun. That when you are reading something, especially if it's a storybook, I love storybooks, right? If you're reading something, it can make you happy. Umberto Eco would speak of the pleasure of the text, and that is beautiful. I think anything that gives you the kind of joy that reading a good story can give you is worth it. You should never think of it as time wasted. It helps you enter what is known as a flow state, that you're just reading and you're lost in something and you're like, let the world go to hell. So I got to tell you something. We are in this place where we shoot these episodes, and we shoot about 6 episodes in 3 days, and this is number 6, and number 5 was today morning, and 2 were yesterday, but in the evening and at night. So when I was going to bed, I was super tired, and I was also super stressed because we had to prep for these episodes and get the structure and the notes ready. Then just before I went to sleep, I switched on my iPad and I said, let me see what books I have over here. And I thought to make notes for this episode, I should search for Harold Bloom's book, which I will refer to later. And so I searched for Bloom in Kindle, and it brought me up not just Harold Bloom's book, but also books published by Bloomsbury, right? Which was a delightfully serendipitous accident. And one of them was a book called After Virtue by Alasdair MacIntyre. Now, this book had first been recommended to me a long, long time ago by Suyash Rai. Suyash is a dear friend of ours. He did this great, awesome 6.5-hour episode of The Seen and the Unseen with me. And I know that MacIntyre is a great influence of his. And because I respect Suyash so much, I just think he's a great thinker and a great guy, I immediately bought the book and I said I have to read him. But I didn't, much as when Land Pritchard gave you Seeing Like a State and you took many years to get to it. I hadn't gotten to it then. Then a few weeks ago, I met Pratap Bhanu Mehta for lunch in Bombay. He had come to Bombay and was kind enough to take me out for lunch. And Pratap, at one point, when I told him about great intellectuals he admired, spoke of Alasdair MacIntyre, who had died in May this year, by the way. So, that was another pinprick in my head that, dude, what are you doing? You got to read this guy. So last night, I was super tired. I searched for Harold Bloom. Just to kind of keep the book ready on the Kindle, not even to read it then, I was so tired. But then I opened After Virtue and I read the first chapter. And then I read half of the second chapter. And then I was really sleepy and I let it go at that point. But I loved it so much that when I woke up in the morning, I had his argument running through my head. That I was thinking of that. And I typically will hit snooze 17 times before I get up. But I kind of jumped out of bed because I was like, I have to read the book. So later in the morning when I was having my coffee sitting at the dining table, I was reading this book. I wasn't prepping for this episode because I have to know how this chapter finishes. So that is the joy reading can give you. It's not just about story books. There are ideas books which expand the brain. And when you discover something that has that effect in you, you should embrace it.
And the last reason?
And the last reason is something I actually touched upon earlier, but because Amit can count, as opposed to Ajay, I will give an 11th reason nevertheless, which it helps us know ourselves. Like I think of it as, we've discussed what Gabriel Garcia Marquez talks about, the public self, the private self, and the secret self. And not only do we not reveal our secret selves to others, we often don't know them ourselves, or we are in denial of them, or we don't get it fully, right? And what books do is it holds up a mirror to ourselves. And that mirror can often reveal to us our private selves, our deepest desires, our thick desires, and indeed our secret self. That you read something that is happening to a character and you say, I get it. I feel this way. Now it makes sense. It didn't make sense earlier, but now it makes sense. That, oh fuck, oh, you're okay. So you don't feel alone in the world because what you felt, what you thought was unique to you is mirrored somewhere else, but you also understand yourself a little better. So, that old exhortation of the Greeks, know thyself, and the best way of knowing thyself, oddly enough, is by reading.
Amit, a lot of people are with us on the dream, but it is so hard to fit into modern life. How should we approach it? How can we reshape our lives so as to really commit ourselves to deep reading and focus and concentration?
I think the key word here, which I want to emphasize, is habit. right? Habit is key. Often people will tell themselves that, oh, I'll read so and so book. Ajay Shah recommended Seeing Like a State on that very cool YouTube show, and so far I've been watching it for his sex appeal and his shirts and Amit's deep dulcet tones. But I shall now read this book. And they'll set themselves the target ki ye parenge ya wo parenge, that book's won a prize, so and so has recommended this, we'll read this. And I think that's a bad way to go about it. You should not set a target that I will do this or I will do that. Instead, you should build a habit. You should build a habit where you're reading regularly, and it doesn't matter what you are reading. Now, hopefully in the last section, I've convinced you, gentle readers, that there are many good reasons when it comes to why you should read a book. So you should be convinced by now that, yeah, reading a book is good. How do I do it? And the only way is to build a reading habit. James Clear, in his great book Atomic Habits, talks about how habits are the compound interest of self-improvement, right? As a finance person, you are no doubt frustrated that many lay persons don't get the power and the magic of compound interest. Habits are the same damn thing, right? You have to build a habit of reading, no matter how cluttered your life is. And it is true that some of us have the privilege of more free time than others. Some of us have the privilege that we are masters of our time. But people's circumstances are what they are. The key question is, within those circumstances, how can they live the better life that they aspire to live? And building a reading habit isn't super hard. It's easy to do. You just have to be bloody minded about it at first. So I'm going to give you a bunch of tips on how to do it. Tip number one is that you have to tell yourself, as with any new habit, that when you start this, you have to stick with it for at least 3 months. And the reason I say that is actually neuroscientific, that the way the brain works is that these loops, these repetitive loops, get hardwired into the basal ganglia, right? And when you do something one day, it is an effort. It is a unique, discrete effort you're making. You do it the second day, the second week, it is still like that. You're having to make an effort. Yeah, I'm sitting with a book. Somebody's wrong on Twitter, who will correct her, right? But you have to stick with it. And once you reach 3 months, or once you reach a few weeks, what you will find is that your habit has become automatic, that you no longer have to make an effort. It feels natural to you. Like, if you think about us, I don't think of myself particularly as a creature of habits. I'm nowhere near as disciplined as I would like to be. But there are some things that are just a habit for me without me giving it that term or calling it that name. That I will eat food in a particular window of time, and that's a habit. I will, ideally get up at a particular kind of time, and that's a habit. After getting up, I'll have my routines, I'll brush my teeth, I'll have a cup of coffee. Those are all habits. That cup of coffee is a habit. So similarly, once you're bloody minded about a reading habit, whatever you decide, you could tell yourself that every day I'll read between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. or every day I'll read for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and I'll come to the different possible configurations later. But once you decide to build a habit, be bloody minded about it for a while, and then it will be so reflexive that you will feel that something is missing in the day if you haven't sat down and read a book. The next point is something I talk about in my writing course as well when I talk about reading and writing, which is, there's a great Nike slogan, just do it, love it. But my slogan for you would be, just be it. There is often a danger where we set ourselves particular goals like, okay, I will read between 7 and 8 from today every day, and you set yourself a goal like that. You do it one day, the second day you kind of manage, third day you fall off the wagon, fourth day you're like, wow, and fifth day you're like, I'm not a books kind of person, I'm a Netflix kind of person, or a Netflix and chill kind of person if you're adequately gregarious. But you get out of that. A better way to think about it is that instead of saying, I will do this, you convince yourself about who you are. You ask yourself, what is the best version of me, right? If I ask myself the question, what is the best version of me? One of my possible answers could be that I am a self-taught person who loves to read. When I am bored, I put away my smartphone and I sit down with a book or a Kindle, right? And once I internalize that self-image of me, then the habits and the actions flow from that self-image, and it creates a virtuous cycle. Then I don't beat myself up if I haven't read for a particular day because, hey, I was busy, but I'm a reader. I will read. That self-image is internalized. It's a virtuous cycle. Whereas what sometimes happens is, if I give myself tasks to do and I am unable to do them, it forms a vicious cycle where I say, ki, "Arey, mujhse na ho payega." And that affects your self-image, and then that feeds into what you do. So one way of becoming a better reader is sitting down with yourself and asking yourself, who is the best version of you, right? If the best version of you is a reader, if the best version of you is someone who sits down with a book when they're free instead of with a smartphone, then I strongly recommend that you think more and more about that. Try to be that person. Everything that we do today is an investment in our future selves. So you are actually building the better version of you by choosing your actions today. And you can get to your actions through this self-image. So now I'll give you a bunch of small little tips, on how to build a habit. Small practical tips. Now we've done the high level stuff. Let's go to small practical tips. And my first practical tip for you, gentle reader, if you want to build a reading habit, is start small. You don't need to say I will read for 1 hour every day. 15 minutes is fine. 2 pages is fine. Tell yourself that today I'll sit with the book, I'll read at least 2 pages, and it doesn't mean that you stop at the bottom of the second page where the word is and. Obviously, you won't do that. Quite often, you'll just keep reading and you'll go on and on. But in general, if you start small, it becomes easier to do. It doesn't feel like a chore anymore. And gradually, you can then pump it up. Many days, you will end up reading more. That's the first tip. The second tip is be consistent. Frequency matters more than duration. If you tell me that, oh, I'll do 1 hour today and then maybe next 2-3 days I'm kind of busy, it's not going to work, then I'm like, no, don't do that. Why are you laughing? You thought of sex again. Bro,
I mean, you say frequency matters more than duration. What else can one think of?
in your case, bro, please. People have asked me, is this going to go on as long as one of your episodes? Anyway, so to get back to the point, frequency matters more than duration, right? And therefore, rather than do like 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, कि Saturday को मैं 3 घंटा book पढ़ूंगा, बाकी week तो यार मैं ऑफिस जाता हूँ. Rather than that, it's okay if you do 15 minutes a day. That's perfectly fine. My next tip is that anchor it to existing routines. Right? So if you have an existing routine that I get up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, and then I sit on my favorite chair, and then I read a book. You anchor it to a routine, it's more likely that it will eventually become reflexive, that when you sit down with a coffee, you need a book. You will feel empty without it. Maybe your routine is, okay, I'm commuting. I have a 35-minute commute, and during that time, I will read. And once that gets ingrained in you, you'll sort of end up doing that. It could be reading first thing in the morning, it could be reading an hour before bed, and then you won't be able to do those other things unless you do this. Like neuroscientists often say, neurons that fire together wire together, which is why sometimes you'll hear a song and a particular memory will come up when you first kissed a girl or the girl first slapped you or whatever, right? And the reason that memory comes up with that song is the song happened around that time and you associate it with that person and that event and so on and so forth. Neurons that fire together wire together. And it's the same thing with habits, that if you build a tapestry of habits, that I get up in the morning, I make a cup of coffee, I go and sit at a particular place, I open my laptop or my MacBook or whatever, and I listen to a particular playlist, right, of whatever music works for me, then once you put all those other things into place, it is more likely that you'll be able to read or you'll be able to write if you're building a writing habit. I mean, this advice really applies for all habits, but in this episode, we're talking about reading. And now I'm going to give a series of tips that fall into one broad category, which is design your environment. So the first tip there is that surround yourself with books. So wherever you are, in whichever room, there is something that you can pick up. There is a book around you, that if you're kind of bored and you're about to take out your phone and look at Instagram again to see chicken videos, dude, chicken videos. I got to show you some chicken videos. We're going to put some chicken videos in the show notes. Please watch them. They're like
Show us books
absolutely
instead.
mind-blowing. Yeah, okay, I'll come to books. I haven't read any books on chickens, but chicken videos, these are so good. These are so good. I'm going to put them in the show notes. Just watch out for them. But leave that aside. You want to pick up your phone and you want to look at a chicken video. And the words from one of them is going through my head. And you want to look at a chicken video, but instead, if there are books around you, then it becomes much more natural that you'll reach for one of them. Like another way you design your environment is have a Kindle app on your phone, right? Take the social media apps out, so they're not in your cell phone environment, and keep the Kindle app up front, so you're more likely to click the Kindle. Now, the problem with this that often occurs is that, if it's on the phone, then you might be tempted to also do other things on the phone beach mein.
Notifications.
Notifications, and I mean, I have all notifications disabled, but I know that Instagram is here, chicken videos are here, Twitter is here, somebody is wrong, I need to correct them. So all of that gets in the way. So then have a dedicated device. I love reading on my iPad. I also have a separate Kindle at home. So, you can have a dedicated device for that and figure it out, but design your environment so there are always books available to you. The next one is remove competition. So if you're reading the Kindle on your phone, take out all social media apps, right? Nothing is urgent. So remove the competition. If you have decided that every night before sleeping, I will read for an hour, then for that hour, either put your phone in another room or put it on silent and decide that I will not look at it. For the world, you are asleep, but you are reading the book. So do something about the competition, right? If you are living with other people, start living alone. I'm kidding. Why are you nodding? It's a joke. Yeah, no, people are important. People matter. So don't do anything about people, but remove other competition to books. Then I would.
On that subject, my personal trick is that I have an iPad. I get an old iPad, sometimes a used iPad, and I have only one thing installed on it, which is the Apple book reader. And I have a Gmail account on that with some temp password, with some temp name and password. It has nothing else. It is incapable of doing anything. It can use a browser and go to the net, which is sometimes useful. For the rest, none of the other apps are there. So I'm using it for reading books, only books or research papers, because the Apple iPad PDF display is pretty nice. You can like make the letters big and so on. And sometimes when I need to Google something while reading, I'm able to do that. So it's my trick of that same genre, that in my backpack, there is a laptop which is full of distractions and an iPad that has none.
Brilliant, and that's a good hack. And my next tip has to do with, I mean, the jargon for it is choice architecture. But simply put, I will say this, that always decide which are the books you want to read next or which are the books you are reading currently. Like number one, it is okay to read multiple books at a time, especially the across genres. If I'm in a fiction kind of mood, I can dip into something. If I don't want an immersive experience in a novel, I can just read some short stories. I think the Paris Review has a collection of stories that are for, when you are on the move. So there are stories short enough that you can read in an elevator ride, and there are much longer stories that you can read over a long haul flight. And, but build a choice architecture. It is okay to read multiple books at a time. It is okay to read multiple genres at a time. But I feel it's important to do that because otherwise decision fatigue sets in. If you're reading one book at a time, you've read a book or decided to give it up, which is fine, more on that later. Then just a choice of, oh, what do I read next? And that takes cognitive energy away. So, figure that shit out at an earlier point in time. You once told me that you have divided yourself into two selves, the planner and the doer. The planner will plan what is Ajay Shah going to do for the next year. The planner calendarizes everything. Then the doer just executes, implements, right? Slightly simplistic, obviously, the planner will pop up once in a while, and etc., etc. But that's a broad...
or even every day in the morning.
Yeah.
One run of the planner code.
Correct.
Then be a dumb executor.
Amazing. Yeah. So you can do that for books. That, okay, I'm going to read this next. And once you've decided and it is, on that front screen of your Kindle, you just go for that unless you're not enjoying it. And I'll come back to that later. And my final tip of building a habit is that feel free to gamify, right? You mentioned the word dopamine a little earlier. And gamifying is fine in the sense that you reward yourself if you finish a book or if you finish a certain number of pages. Some people are deeply addictive and dopamine matters. They're not deeply addictive in the sense that they're going to start drinking or have a drugs addiction or a gambling addiction. But dopamine affects all of us. And to some extent or the other, all of us are affected by it. Now, productivity gurus have gamed this with to-do lists. Because every time you do something on a to-do list, you put a tick mark. The tick mark is dopamine. You get the job done, right? James Clear in his book Atomic Habits talks about this lady who would sit with a jar of hairpins and an empty jar. And this was a writing habit. And every time she would write a para, she would take a hairpin from the full jar to the empty jar. So every time every time a hairpin is moved, a dopamine hit comes. He also speaks of a bodybuilder who for every set of reps would drop marbles from a full jar to an empty jar. And one sincerely hopes he never dropped his weights on his head because then he might have lost his marbles. But anyway, I keep making this joke. People keep laughing. I don't know why. So gamification is also something that can work. And the ultimate act of designing your environment is find a community of readers. Like in both life lessons and my clear writing community, there are multiple book clubs. In the clear writing community, there were book clubs for non-fiction and fiction. They were all remote, so people would have a Zoom call once a month, last Saturday of every month, and then discuss a book they had read, and etc. etc. That's great. If you can find something, within your physical environment, and you actually physically meet and discuss a book, that's great. You and I were part of such a book club once. We would physically meet and discuss stuff, and I think this is absolutely fantastic and worth doing.
So there was a point at which at NIPFP, Ila Patnaik was irritated that the admin team was coming to her for too many decisions. Okay, her mood was, guys, figure it. I have no great value added in what needs to be done. You figure it out. So her solution was, each time you come to me to ask me a question, you have to put one paper clip into this jar. Bas. It worked dramatically. That's it. That really changed their behavior. And then they became thoughtful. We'd have to go to her with a paper clip, and we put a paper clip and we hang our head in shame, and then we ask her a question. So the flow of rubbish interrupts that were coming to her went down dramatically. So that's a nice little trick. The second is that Susan Thomas runs a book club in Bombay. So for folks in Bombay, please come get involved.
That's a great story about Ila Patnaik. And, in AI, they run this famous thought experiment about the paperclip maximizer. It turns out that Ila is a paperclip minimizer. Not bad, huh?
Amit, take us to the third section.
So our third section is how to read a book. And many people ask me this question that, okay, I'm not really a reader. You've explained why to read a book, I get that. Building a habit I can do, I've built other habits before. But when I actually open a book, how do I approach it? How should I read it? And this is a good question in the sense that reading is something we have all discovered for ourselves. We never started out with a roadmap that this is how you read a book, but over time we have our own ways of reading a book, different ways of reading fiction, non-fiction, poetry, etc., etc. All of that is there. But nevertheless, I understand this subject can be a bit confusing, which is why I've prepared a little bit of a guide, and I've referred to 3 classic books while doing this. One of them is by a gentleman called Mortimer Adler. It's called How to Read a Book, right? And he talks about how when you sit down with a book, and this section on what Mortimer Adler talks about is really a guide for reading non-fiction. Can apply to some fiction also. Think of it as non-fiction. The next section will deal with detail in fiction. So, this is mainly about non-fiction. Now, he says that there are 4 ways of reading a book, 4 modes of reading. The first one is what he calls elementary reading, which is that you can make sense of the words. That is basically what literacy gives you. That you read a sentence, Ajay got up and slapped Amit, and you understand what happened, you picture it in your head. You've understood that much. So this is elementary reading. But after this comes what he talks about as inspectional reading. Now, inspectional reading is what? You're not actually sitting down and reading the book right now at this stage. You take the book, you kind of get comfortable with it, you make friends with it. It's like a first date. You open it, you look at the table of contents. If the table of contents are well written, as they are sometimes, you get a sense of it. You flip through the chapters, you kind of see what it's about. You start getting a sense of that, what the book really kind of looks like. And when it comes to non-fiction, the modern trend very much is that many non-fiction books are basically an essay turned into a book. Like Nicholas Carr, I mentioned, he wrote this essay in The Atlantic in 2008. Publishers must have approached him and said, ki bhai kitab, and he wrote The Shallows, which is a pretty good book. But a lot of books are books that shouldn't have been books. They should have stayed an essay. That bhai, you've done the essay and that's it. So when there are great books like, for example, The End of History in The Last Man by Francis Fukuyama, based on this essay he wrote, The End of History, ? That book is a great book and really elaborated and went well beyond the essay. But a lot of books don't. And sometimes you can just figure it out. Sometimes you can read the preface or skim through the first chapter, and then you get it that after that the guy is just winging it and you get a sense of it. So this is the second phase of reading a book. It's an inspectional phase. The third level of reading that Adler talks about is analytical reading. This is what he calls reading to understand. And there's a great quote by Francis Bacon that he cites, which speaks to the heart of this. Bacon said, some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. And his funda is that very often there is a book that requires chewing and digesting, and you have to read it slowly, right? And there are sort of four ways in which you can do this, which he lays out, four steps rather, where he says, number one, classify the book according to its kind and subject matter. Number two, state what the whole book is about with the utmost brevity. Number three, enumerate its major parts in that order and relation and outline these parts. Number four, define the problem or problems the author is trying to solve. And all of these sound really simple one-liners, but they're actually deeply complicated. And in a few moments, I'm actually going to show you how I read non-fiction books on Rome Research. So I'm going to talk about my process of analytical reading, as Adler would call it, and how I, start taking down the information, start parsing it, and start making sense of it. The fourth kind of reading, which is one level above analytical reading, is what Adler calls synoptical reading. Synoptical reading is, let's say that you have read Ajay Shah on financial crisis. You don't stop there. You want to know more about financial crisis. So you go back and you read Ben Bernanke and you read Hyman Minsky and you read the Monetarist School and you read Milton Friedman and you read John Maynard Keynes and you read the Austrians and you read Lawrence White and you read all of that literature. So you're building all of these different entry points into the same subject. And with every book that you read, your understanding of it gets richer and richer. Right, and he calls this synoptical analysis. I remember doing this with Mahatma Gandhi when I had done a two-episode series on Gandhi for the Seen and the Unseen with Ramchandra Guha. I read some 30 books for that. I read everything around him. I read all the biographies that were available, essays, analysis, whatever I could, because I really wanted to get into the subject, And as I got into it, the two episodes were like 1.5 hours each or whatever, so not my long-form kind of episodes. But after it was over, Ram recommended to me Rajmohan Gandhi's great book, The Good Boatman. And I think The Good Boatman, which is a series of essays with themes on Gandhi's life, is like a synoptical book. It synthesizes a lot of stuff. Now, Mortimer Adler therefore said that you have to engage with the past. In a dialogue with history. And for this purpose, he also put together what is known as Great Books of the Western World. And I have a personal story around this, that my father had the 60-volume collection of Great Books of the Western World, most of them unwrapped. He just bought it and I think he wanted to give it to me. So for about 10 years before he died, he would keep telling me that, take it to Bombay, take it with you, this is for you, I really want you to have this. And in Bombay, the cost of a book is not what you pay for it, but the real estate it occupies. So being a poor podcaster, I said, look, I don't even have space in my little rented house for this. And I mean, I had thousands of books, but these 60 volumes would take up a lot of space, so I didn't. After he died, we cleared up his library. He had many thousands of books, found a community library to give them to. But these books I kept. So these 60 books are at home, not because I'm necessarily going to read them in their beautiful hardback form, but because they're an artifact. It's a memory of my dad. And the 2 volumes I do read, that I do take out, that in fact are not on the shelf right now, but on my desk at home, are called the Synopticon. They are the first 2 volumes, right? They are the first 2 volumes of the series, and they're not the great books. They are the Synopticon. And remember, he calls it synoptical reading. The Synopticon is a series of essays written by Mortimer Adler on themes like death, love, desire, sadness, and so on, purpose, meaning, agency, and so on and so forth. And what he does is he takes each of these themes and he's gone through all of these books, the entire canon, and these, the great books of the Western world is 60 volumes, but it's much more than 60 books because many volumes have 5-6 books and all of that. So it's, it goes into 3 figures, and it is that many books. And what do all of them say about love? How do you synthesize that and write an essay on that? What do all of them say about death? It is such a good read. It fills me with such awe. It fills me with such joy. I'll read a part of that and I'll see a quote by someone and I'll say, oh my God, I didn't know Nietzsche said this. And then I just have to go to that volume and read Nietzsche. So it's a beautiful sort of way of carrying that exercise out. And I'm like, you don't need the physical books. You don't even necessarily need, Mortimer Adler's essays or the Synopticon themselves. When I get interested in a subject, and I'm reading something about it, I don't stop at one book, even if that narrative makes sense. So I'll often go to the footnotes. Where did he get this from? Where did he get this from? Oh, he's mentioned this person. What has he written? Let me go and check. Let me ask ChatGPT. Let me see the Wikipedia. Let me go on Amazon and see what books this person has. Oh, it's on Kindle. Oh, purchases make me happy because, retail therapy. Oh, I'm going to buy this, etc., etc. Right? So I think of it as entering rabbit holes. I tell everyone who asks me that entering rabbit holes is great. Do not think of these as digressions and a waste of time. They are essential, and we must all be in the habit of it, because they are what leads to our knowledge becoming richer. Another great book I'll recommend for gentle readers is How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom, great critic, great thinker, great writer. And in this book, he talks about how to read different kinds of books. You know, what attitude you should bring to it. And this is really important. For example, he talks about short stories, fiction. How do you read fiction? And what he says is that for this, you need to slow down. You know, the categories that Mortimer Adler spoke about, inspectional reading and all that, I never do inspectional reading with a work of fiction. In fact, you should not. Why should you slow down? In Bloom's words, short stories favor the tacit. They compel the reader to be active in discerning explanations that the writer avoids. Stop quote. You know, there's a phrase called show don't tell, which is often used for what all writers should do. It's a very valuable tool. That don't tell the reader something, show it to them. There's also the theory called the iceberg theory. I think Hemingway came up with it, which is that in a story, you only tell what the tip of the iceberg. Most of the iceberg is underneath, right? It is for the reader to figure it out themselves. You know, if Amit is sitting and looking out of the window with a cup of tea in his hand, and gradually the light goes and the tea is undrunk and it gets cold even though he's holding it, by showing the reader that image, you have told him something about Amit's state of mind. You don't need to say Amit is melancholy or Amit is missing somebody, or you don't need to say that. You know, the readers invest themselves into figuring out what's going on from what you show them. That's what great fiction does. That's what great short stories do. And therefore, it is important to approach them like that. It is not a passage of information. It is not, transactional. कि मुझे ये knowledge चाहिए, बस काम खत्म. No, you're entering a world. And sometimes you need to slow down, read every word, think about what just happened, and see the whole of the iceberg, dive deep and see the whole of the iceberg rather than just the tip of it. And that requires therav. Now, when it comes to reading poems, Bloom says an interesting things, and you will vibe with this, Ajay Shah. I simply know you will. He says when it comes to poems, memorize them. And this is what he says. Wherever possible, memorize them. Silent, intensive rereadings of a shorter poem that truly finds you should be followed by recitations to yourself unless you discover that you are in possession of the poem. Committed to memory, the poem will possess you and you will be able to read it more closely, which great poetry demands and rewards. Right? And this is also powerful because poetry is also about rhythm, even free verse. Rhythm is supremely important in that, how it sounds. And when you memorize something, you are constantly playing it in your head, reading it out in your head, as it were, you're living with it. And obviously, you won't memorize something random you don't like. You'll memorize things which are dear to you, and they imprint themselves in your mind. And there is a beauty in that first you belong to the poem, and then the poem belongs to you. And I have many, many poems that I remember like this. I know you do too. And what is important is that very often in the course of the show, gentle readers would know that Ajay will suddenly come up with a song lyric which he will remember perfectly. And I think that's fine. I would include that in the same category as poetry, right? It is giving your life emotional richness and depth when you do that. And that is a true appreciation of both a song and a poem. As far as novels are concerned, Bloom makes pretty much the same point as he does about short stories, that you need immersion, you need to be slow, you need to enter the world. One point that he makes is that when you sit down with a novel, you are in a sense sitting down with yourself. That after a while, everything about the novel is about you. Because, one book is not just one book. You read that novel and I read that novel, they're different books, because I will react to it with myself and you will react to it with yourself, and it will eventually become a different book for each of us. And that is a joy. And a great novel gives you that depth, gives you those multitudes and those multiplicities, and we should embrace that. And he also gives analytical tools on how you can think about novels and what's happening in the book. For example, he says one good question to ask is, do the characters change over time? In what way? What causes that change? That's useful to think about, right? I mean, ultimately, Kurt Vonnegut, I think, once said that in every story that you write, somebody has to want something. right? Ultimately, all literature is about this. It is about a transition from one state to another, and there is a friction and a conflict at the heart of it. And we start getting curious about how the conflict will be resolved, and we start empathizing with the character because we see ourselves in their shoes, and we think that, shit, how is this going to end? So that journey is fascinating, and as you sit and think about it, your process of reading a book just gets deeper and deeper. Bloom also was a great, great writer on not just poetry. I love some of his criticism, but also plays. And this is how he says you should read Shakespeare in particular. Reading Shakespeare's plays, you learn to meditate upon what is left out. That is one of the many advantages that a reader has over a theatre goer in regard to Shakespeare. Ideally, one should read a Shakespeare play, watch a good performance of it, and then read it again. Stop quote. Right? So it is not as if a play is a script for something that is going to be performed. Why should you read that? Why don't you just go and see the play? That is how it is meant to be done. That's not the case. Every performance is unique. It is happening live. There is great value in it. So of course you should go out and watch theatre, though that is one good habit I haven't actually picked up, never gotten into theatre. But I did read plays when I was a much younger person, Waiting for Godot, Don't Look Back in Anger, so on and so forth. And this is an interesting way of reading a play, and it strikes me that you can also read a screenplay by a good screenplay writer this way, like Robert Towne's Chinatown, for example, is an excellent example. So the third book I want to recommend for you is by Francine Prose, aptly named, and is called Reading Like a Writer. And there, that book is intended for writers, where she is saying that when you read a book, look at the tools, look at what the author has done, look at why they have used one word and not another word. In one of the webinars in my clear writing course, I talk in particular about words, sentences, paragraphs, that depending on the context, you make a choice. There are some contexts in which a lot of short sentences together might be fine, like the hard-boiled crime fiction of Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler, when you have an action scene. Amit entered the room. Amit slapped Ajay. Ajay picked up a gun. Ajay, so you have a fast-moving tapestry. But there are some contexts in which that is completely wrong, in which a long sentence that can go on for pages, as in the case of Horace Saramago, is actually appropriate, because you are building that immersive experience where you are in someone's head and it's almost like a stream of consciousness, and you're seeing the world through their eyes and you're reacting accordingly, and you are them and they are you. And see what a long sentence this was. So, all of these tools, once you start reading mindfully, once you start reading like a writer, as Prose says, are useful. And she looks at various aspects of writing and how writers use them, and this can also enrich your reading experience. So very quickly, instead of doing recommendations at the end, I want to recommend a bunch of books on this subject, which I think are worth reading, and you guys should check it out. Virginia Woolf has a great essay, How Should One Read a Book? I will link it from the show notes. E.M. Forster wrote Aspects of the Novel in 1927, which gives you a great insight into a great novelist's mind. Why Read the Classics by Italo Calvino is again an excellent book. One book that I absolutely love by James Wood is called How Fiction Works, which is useful not just for people who want to write, but even for readers. Like, I promise you, it will transform the way you read a book as you understand the use of voice, and you understand how modern novels have gradually evolved, the role that Gustave Flaubert played and everything else that happened after that. So it's a really important book if you want to learn to appreciate literature. And then a recent book by Alan Jacobs, The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction. So these are books that I would recommend. They're easily available. One of them is an essay. So go and check them out, apart from the 3 books I mentioned before this. So I have 4 closing thoughts on this. These are common questions I get from people who want to read, so I kind of want to address them. And the first of those thoughts is that form doesn't matter. People will often ask me that, hey, should I read a physical book or should I read a Kindle, and what about audiobooks? Here's the thing. Literature is words. That's what they are. Everything else is packaging. So whether you read those words in a physical book or you read them on a Kindle doesn't really matter. There are nuanced differences to the reading experience. I won't go there, but by and large, literature is literature, and it should not matter. Those who say, oh, I only read physical books, are actually demonstrating perhaps their age and definitely a nostalgia for a particular kind of packaging. There is no love of literature there. Literature is the words. So the way that I see it is that anything that helps you read in a peaceful environment works. It could be a Kindle, it could be a Kindle app on your smartphone, it could be a physical book. That's perfectly fine. Kindles are really useful. You can carry them around with you, make notes that stay forever, etc., etc. I do both. I grew up reading physical books, and now I use Kindle a lot. I do a lot of note taking, so that really works for me. And as far as audiobooks are concerned, I would say that I look at audiobooks in a separate category from printed books. At one level, I'd say the same thing. It's the words that matter. Though obviously, when you're listening to an audiobook, it's a different experience from reading a book, because when you're reading a book, you can stop, you can go to the previous sentence, you can ponder over something. Typically, you listen to audiobooks when you're out running, you're listening at higher speeds. It's a different sort of experience. But I would nevertheless say that it is not either or. Many of us don't have the time in our daily lives to sit down with a book and make the time to read it. A point that you have made is when you sit with a book, you got to focus on it. You got to put all your attention on it. Many people don't have that time to be able to just focus on a book. But if you are hanging on a local train and it's a half an hour journey, you can listen to an audiobook and your focus is still on the words, but you haven't had to take out time specifically for it. And that and physical environment might not be conducive for reading a book. So I think audiobooks are great. I think in whatever way you consume your books, that's perfectly fine by me. That's point number one. Point number two is that it's okay to stop reading a book. People often commit the sunk cost fallacy that they'll read 30 pages and then they'll say, Arey, I spent so much time reading this, I must finish the book. And I'm like, no, don't throw good money after bad, as it were. Don't throw good time after bad. If you're not enjoying the book, you need to stop. And you need to think of this in terms of opportunity cost. Like, do an exercise. Make a chart where you think about what your life expectancy is. Take an optimistic projection. Think about how many books the best version of you reads in a year. Take an optimistic projection. Multiply the two numbers together. That's more or less the maximum number of books you're going to read in your life. It is pitifully small of the millions of books written. So therefore, don't waste any time reading a book that is not doing something for you. And don't feel guilty about not enjoying a book everybody else loves, right? The deal is sometimes we make the trap that, oh, this is a big important book, it's won a prize, now I have to finish it, it reflects on me if I don't finish it. No, it doesn't reflect on you, right? It just means that at this moment in time, that particular book isn't meant for you. It is okay, it is not a big deal, you don't have to do it. But feel free to put it aside. And in an orthogonal sense, I would also add that it doesn't matter what kind of reading you do. As far as I'm concerned, whether you're reading an airport bestseller or you're reading Seeing Like a State or you're reading great academic papers, it doesn't matter to me. If it brings you either enjoyment or enlightenment, if it brings you one of those two things, it is perfectly fine. All reading is good. Don't be snobbish about this. Anything that you enjoy reading is great, and through osmosis, you are learning about the world and you're learning the tools of language. The third point I want to make is that don't think of this as a competition. There is no Olympics of reading. What a mistake that people will make, like people used to ask me, how many books a year do you read? And I remember once there was a scandal on Twitter because people started shitting on me because I said quite honestly that year I had read 200 books. Now my job is reading. I have the superpower of reading both fast and deep at the same time. So as you know, I can read 3-4 books in a day and not skim them, but actually read them. And how much I retain is a different matter entirely. And people got really upset with me and started abusing me and said I was showing off and all of that. And since then, I haven't mentioned a number. And actually, now the number is far, far less than that. It's a fraction of that. And I have to get my reading habit back up going. But I would say the reason I can read like that is I have a reading habit since I was 3 or 4 years old. Since then, I wanted to be a writer as well, right? So you have 45, 46 years of a habit, you're going to get fast at it. It's just the way it is. Don't beat yourself up if you don't read that fast. Because for me, speed of reading doesn't matter. This is not an Olympics, it's not a competition. You read 5 books a year, that's fine. What is important is not so much the number of books, but the time that you spend. Why do I say that? Because the time that you spend is spent in a particular mental state. There is therav, there is contemplation, you're processing knowledge. It is that state of mind that I value and that makes you a better person and that gives you more insight into the world and yourself. The number of books doesn't matter. So don't beat yourself up. It's not a competition. You don't even need to keep score. Just read what you enjoy reading and build a habit of reading, and the number doesn't matter. And my final point goes back to the question of identity. Let's begin with the question of who you are. Don't be about what should you do, cool people read, I want to seem intellectual, to myself even, I want to read. Don't begin with that. Begin with the question of who is the best version of you. If the best version of you is a reader, someone who likes to enter rabbit holes, someone who likes to understand the world, someone who gets joy in the immersion in the lives of others and who feel that they understand themselves a little better, embrace that. Embrace that. It will take away loneliness from your solitude. It is a beautiful thing. And embrace that self-image of yourself, and then embrace the habit of reading.
That's a great episode on reading. I just have a few small things to add to it. First is a personal story. I am just a reader with a funny way in which this happens to me. I'm the world's slowest reader. I read pages slowly, but I read them deeply. So I read a small amount of material, much less than I would like. Okay, I would like to read 3x the papers and 10x the books compared to what I actually do. But my saving grace is that what I read well. I read deeply. I literally play with sentences, words, arguments as they are going. It's not a sprint. I only have one mode of reading, and that is slow. So I read slowly and I read well, and everything that has happened to me has come out of that. So I'm not saying it's good for everyone. I'm not saying others have to be like this. I'm just describing my way, and I'm old enough today that I've stopped thinking about it. So I used to think that, surely you can do better, and I've given up. This is my way of reading, that I require extreme attention and focus, and getting chunks of time is hard, and I read slowly. Fine, that's all I'm capable of. The second thing I want to say here is there is an analogy with the problem of food habits. Okay, so eating healthy is hard, and eating healthy is a social experience. So if you are in a household where there is junk food being purchased and there is, maida and white rice coming out of the kitchen, it is a superhuman effort that is nearly impossible for one person to resist that food environment and to be different. So what modern thinking on nutrition has become is you have to change the food environment, that whatever is that domestic arrangement that we call a household, it is the entire household that has to change gears. One person cannot fight the tide. It's just not possible. It's impossible. I feel similarly around the whole project of reading and building knowledge, that it's social. It is about community, that one does need to think within family, within our 515 people, can there be a greater community project of reading and discussing? And I feel this will make everybody's life so much easier. Then you're going with the grain. It is too difficult to stick out and be isolated and do it alone. So while I'm on this subject, Amit, what many people are telling me, which fills my heart with joy, is the best way to use EIE is a group viewing, where at every chapter break you hit pause. So there's a bunch of people, they play chapter 1. When we tinkle the chapter separator, you hit pause and argue about it. So that's active learning, as opposed to passively consuming a 1-hour video or 2-hour video. It's much better for multiple people to do it together, to make it a community project, and then at the end of each chapter to stop and argue about it. And there will be 3 people in the room who say, I don't agree with this at all. Great, talk about it, argue about it. At that point the knowledge becomes your own. That's active learning. Otherwise it's passive learning. So this is, I think, a second idea that all of us should apply, that as with the battle of eating well, think of the battle of reading well. And it is harder to do it alone. Yes, of course you can do it alone, but it's harder to do it alone. And if you can create a greater social context in which these kinds of objectives can be pursued, then it's easier, and all of us will be able to do it better.
That's a lovely story. It's also scary. Like at one level, I think at EIE, we have achieved the max we could achieve if the discourse changes. So if a bunch of people are watching our show and stopping at a chapter and every one of them disagrees with us, I don't care. As long as they articulate the discussions well and the ideas are in the discourse and everybody's richer and better off. At the same time, Ajay Shah, I worry about what they are saying. Right? They might well be saying that Ajay Shah's shirt is so good today. Ajay is so sexy. Why is that Amit on the show?
That shouldn't happen at the chapter
How
break.
would the show look with 2 Ajays talking to each other? That's something to think about. Huh? And what do you think? You like me?
The third thing is something I saw recently in a New York Times podcast conversation by Ezra Klein, which was about the distinction between a sophisticated AI summary of a book in 1,000 words versus the experience of reading a book. And I think it goes to the core of everything you said about the journey of reading books. Yeah, you can read a 1,000 word summary and you can look sophisticated in a cocktail party. So if that's your objective, you're actually done. Take the 1,000 word summary, go home. That's not why we read books. Similarly, we don't read books to memorize that material, because I guarantee you that 1 month from now, many pieces of the argument and story will not be, articulated clearly in your mind. We read books because for that duration of 10 hours or 20 hours, we are with the author in an intimate conversation. We are grappling with the argument, we are grappling with complex ideas, and we are thinking about the world. And it is that act of thinking and arguing with oneself and disagreeing with the author and having those aha moments which changes our brain in a permanent way. And the payoff is not that you get a compact summary, you'll get that with 1,000 words. And the payoff is not that we'll get some information or a practical fact that we'll be able to recollect and use on the fly. The payoff is that you're training your LLM. You are changing your mind. You're working at a deeper level. And the consequences are a bit invisible. But we grow our knowledge, we grow our sense of the world, we grow our very character through that journey of 10, 20 hours with one great person at a time. And that is why we should read.
And I can't underscore this more strongly. Like last year when I was in DC, this friend of mine who lives there took me for a drive, and he was saying that, you know what I started doing, and he thought I'll approve of it. You know what I started doing? I have AI make summaries of your seen unseen episodes. So it'll give me a 500-word summary of your 8-hour episode, and I know everything that's in it, and it's so nice. And I was just so angry. Like I was literally viscerally angry, not because it's my show, but because that's such a stupid way of consuming knowledge. Like he does that for books and all that also. And for me, the whole point of a book is not that it's a transfer of information or whatever. The whole point of a book is that it is teaching you how to think. That process is important. There is no shortcut for that, and
So in this modern computer age, we use the word information technology,
Yeah.
and we use the word information. I viscerally reject the word information
Yeah.
in connection to books. Books are not information. Information is trivial. You can look it up. There's Google, there's CMI. You'll get bounty of information with very little effort. That's not what this is about. This is something bigger. It's deeper. It is about your knowledge. It is about your interest in the world. It's your connection to the world. It is about your insight into the world, and it is about your reason to be.
The best technology to solve man's search for meaning is books. We should all read. So I'm going to give a brief demo of how I use Roam Research. Roam Research is an awesome app. It's based on a German note-taking system called Zettelkasten. And I love it for two main reasons. And one, it features nested entries, which I'll explain in a moment. And the other is bidirectional linking. So here's a page. You see Ghazala Wahab's name there. This is an episode I did with Ghazala a long time back. The first episode I did with her when her book Born a Muslim came out. And the name of the episode was Being Muslim in India. So the theme was wider than the book, though the book also covered a lot of it. So how do I read a book? Her book is called Born a Muslim. And when I started reading it, the first thing I did was I made these categories, that these are the chapter titles. There's an introduction and there are 8 chapters, and I write them down. Then I start reading. So under introduction, every point that comes up, now these are nested entries as you go one level deeper. Under introduction, every point that came up, and this was really about her personal history, I'm writing those points down. So she wrote about the Agra Mohalla, perhaps, I like the quote, so I go one level deeper and the quote is here. So seen unseen listeners would sometimes be super impressed is that Amit has all the quotes at his fingertips. No, bro, I'm kind of reading them out from this. There's a beautiful example of Show Don't Tell here, where she talks about her grandfather, who they called Abba, his love for the kids. And instead of just saying, oh, he loved his grandchildren a lot, she says, during winter, he used to shell pine nuts during the day so he could reward us with fistful of shell nuts in the evening. Right? So, beautiful example, and all of this is therefore available to me. All the quotes are there, all the different pointers are there, and this is just one chapter. This is the introduction. Now, my episode doesn't follow the structure of the book. This is just a book. And the structure that my episode really had was the first 1.5 hours or so was about her personal journey. And then it was about Islam in India starting in chronological order, unlike the book, which starts with Muslims in independent India. So it started with like the story of Indian Islam. Now you can see that all these pointers are there, and I can go, many levels sort of deeper. And the advantage of organizing it in this way is that supposing there is something she mentions, and I know it's somewhere in my notes, but I don't know where. Now, earlier I would have 60 pages of Microsoft Word, and I'd frantically be scrolling up and down or doing Control F, and it really got hard. But over here, for example, if she talks about women, I can go straight to the subject over here, and if she's talking, say, about double victimization, I can click here. If she's talking about triple talaq, I can click here. Everything is easily within reach. Now, you'll notice this double victimization thing is also has this hyperlink to it called quotes. Now, how this works is that within Rome, you can put into double brackets any category that you wish to create or add to, and then that becomes a clickable link. And when you click on that link, all the other general quotes are there, and then the episodic quotes are also there within that. And this is called bidirectional linking, and there's a lot of this that happens. Now, let me also give you an example of how to start processing information. Sometimes you're reading a book and there's just a lot of information, and you don't yet have a way to categorize it, unlike the chapter titles in this book. How do you then do it? So I faced this issue when I did an episode with Mahima Vashish, to one of my writing students who does a newsletter called Womaning in India. And she had written more than 100 installments of a newsletter by then. And I would obviously have to read all of them, and then I would talk to her. But how do I categorize it? How do I organize the information? So I did that by first saying that, okay, her newsletter is called Womaning. Let's just go straight to the content, forget the other categories for now. And then I just started listing down the content. So, this is one particular kind of piece, there's another kind of piece, and there's something on pregnancy, something on body shaming. I start writing all of these down. But simultaneously, and each of these are detailed. So when she speaks about imposter syndrome, that particular post has all these different points, and I'm kind of bringing them up. All my quotes are here. But at the same time, these are all separate pieces about separate things. How do I make sense of it? How do I build a classification scheme? So for that, I opened another section called themes. So wherever something seemed to fit in a particular theme, I would note it down. Like controlling female sexuality, she has one post on that. Fitting stereotype, she has a whole bunch of posts on that, right? And I would just copy paste that entire section here. So, the Raja Beta syndrome, I know it's all here. Tell me where to sign, I know it's all here. Violence on women, there are these episodes. World Design for Men, again, a whole bunch of, not episodes, a whole bunch of newsletter posts. And Interior Lives of Women, okay, there's this one. Women Hobbling Themselves, there is this one. So then when I recorded this episode, once we did her personal history and got that over with, I could actually approach her material thematically. These are not themes she had organized them in, but these were themes that I thought made sense for me to talk to her about. And what it did, like, ignored that I did this for a podcast. Even if I did it for myself, what it does is that now I understand the territory. When we think of the lives of women in India, what is the territory? Controlling female sexuality is a theme. Stereotypes is a theme. A world designed by men for men is a theme. All these themes are out here, and I have frameworks now with which I can look at them. If I want to dig deeper, I know what to dig deeper in. So we ended up having a great conversation on the seen and the unseen, but also apart from that, I found this a great way of organizing the content.